Chris introduced me, let me introduce the purpose of this panel, and then I'll ask my esteemed panelists to introduce themselves. What we're going to talk about this morning is just in general, we want to talk about the needs of kids and teens. What do they want from their experience on their internet? Let's hear what that experience would be like from their perspective. We're going to talk about changes that parents, caregivers, and teens and kids themselves might be able to make to change their experience. And then we're going to talk about the current inventory of policy proposals and whether we think any of them could lead to a better, safer, healthier experience for kids and teens online. So hopefully we'll stay in that vicinity for our conversation. So let me let the panelists introduce themselves. I'll just start with you, Eva.
Hi everyone, I'm Eva Smithing. I'm the Advocacy Director at the Young People's Alliance. We're a nonprofit dedicated to trying to fix these issues we're talking about. Excited to be here. Thank you.
Hi, good morning everyone. My name is Marissa Edmunds. I'm the State Policy Lead at the Family Online Safety Institute, or FOSI. We are a 501c3 nonprofit that works to make the online world safer for kids and their families. Glad to be here.
And my name is Shae, Gardner. I use she, her pronouns, and I'm the Director of Policy and Research for LGBT Tech. So we are a nonprofit that fights for digital equity and representation for members of the LGBTQ+ community who increasingly are turning to digital spaces and resources in lieu of access to physical ones.
Great. I'm so excited for this conversation. I know I have a great deal to learn from each of you. So let's start with the idea that obviously over the past few years there has been enormous and increasing attention on the healthfulness and safety of spaces online. But a lot of that is from legislators and others, and I'm interested in what do kids and teens want from their experience online. Let's flip the script from the harms that I'm sure everyone in this room could list, and instead talk about what kids and teens want from their online experience. So I will start with you and talk a little bit about that.
Yeah, I think that this is a really great question and a very great way to level the panel. To assume that kids know what they want from digital experiences is a little bit crazy because they've been conditioned by profit-driven social media companies their entire lives. And it's very difficult for us to expect what social media looks like outside of that norm. I've done a lot of talking to young people about these issues, and I'll have amazing conversations with them about everything that they know that's wrong with social media. They understand the unaligned incentives, they understand the business model, and then I'll ask them, okay, so if you could change one thing about social media, what would that be? And they will look at me as if I'm crazy and a ghost, and they'll say, getting exploited is the norm, we can't change that, it's capitalism, a vote, what do you mean? And it's really difficult to be in that position when we're doing this work, because I like to think that I'm doing this work for those young people. I think in order to get young people's brains thinking about what it is that they want from social media and what that can look like, we need to push companies to be really creative with the implementation of compliance measures for regulation, and they need to push themselves outside of the box of what is normal and what they have been functioning in this entire time, and really focus on creativity and connection and amplifying those two things. I would also say that young people want the tech companies who make their social media platforms to invest a lot of money in building safe products for them, in creating better, more innovative ways to connect online, as opposed to those companies investing all of that money that they could be putting towards making their platforms better to creating super PACs and defending themselves against regulation and defending very, very poor products is what I would say. It's definitely a visual thing.
So if the idea that kids and teens can articulate what kind of experience they want is one of the misconceptions we're working with, are there others that are kind of driving the narrative today?
Sure. I mean, I think what Ava described, we like to say at FOSI is that kids are smart and they also have autonomy, and a very, wild concept for some is that they also have rights. And I think they would like to be able to exercise those rights, and I think children want to explore online worlds safely. They want to have tools that are embedded in platforms to be able to block unwanted access, unwanted users from contacting them. They want to be able to set screen time limits for themselves. They want to be able to enjoy what the internet has to offer in a safe way. So I think what often gets assumed is that we just need to have this oversight over children, and there's this kind of want to ban children from being able to access certain platforms just because they don't get it. We need to protect them, but I think that children are, they know a lot more sometimes than their own caregivers on how to protect themselves online. So I think one of the misconceptions is that kids only need to be protected instead of having that empowerment.
Yeah, if I can actually build off of that as well, I think there are two sort of similar misconceptions that we see quite frequently. The first is that youth are this monolith, that there's a one-size-fits-all approach, that could work for someone who's 13 and work for someone who's 17. And we know that those are just such a distinct set of differences, even between individual youth. So kind of remembering that you are talking about individuals, with sort of their own experiences, life experiences, and desires when they go onto these platforms, and not just treating them as if it is one solution. And sort of the second misconception I think I see a lot is this idea that the access is the issue. The idea that if there was some sort of switch you could flip that would just take all youth off social media, that would somehow solve the issue. And what we have learned from our conversations with queer and trans folk and queer and trans youth is that a lot of times, I sort of alluded to in my intro, but they don't go onto these platforms because it is somehow better than an equal experience they have available to them in the real world. It is, in many cases, the only place they are able to access these affirmative resources in community. So kind of understanding that this is not a situation where you turn off the computer, go out and climb a tree or whatever that kind of narrative has been. There are more deep needs when we have this conversation.
Let me tie some of those things together. Marissa, kind of break down the monolith. In addition to the ones you described, are there other priorities that we should be solving for in these solutions? And one way to maybe break down the monolith is by age of the child. Are there predictable or usable age breaks that can help us create better experiences?
Yeah, and similar to Shae, FOC, we know that not all children are the same. So what one child needs and the access or lack of they're going to need is not going to be the same for another child. So, but we do believe that there are some general guidelines, and I think those particularly for younger users, that there can be some and should be some parental involvement for the youngest users. So utilizing some parental tools to monitor screen time, and we never want those parental tools to be ever used in surveillance. So just as the training wheels come off in the real space, those training wheels come off in the digital space as well. So there shouldn't be this narrative of as soon as you're 18, you just have no access up until 18, and then after 18, full access to the internet is just not feasible. So I think there is some sort of this gradual, proportional sort of system for as a child when they're younger versus a 15, 16, 17-year-old. And some of the legislation that we do see at the state level unfortunately treats all children under 18 the same, and that we don't think is the best approach.
We all know that engaging government in any of these authority issues is problematic, particularly when it is approaching or adjacent to the idea of speech. So we'll get there. We'll talk about the role of policy in government. But before we do, I want to see if there are other players that can make a material difference in experience. So Shae, I'll start with you here. What should we be asking platforms to do more of in this area? But before we start throwing policy at them, what should we be able to expect our platforms to do better and differently?
I think above all else, platforms could absolutely make the experience and the control of that experience more user-centric. It is something that we have seen with members of the community is that they have a better experience when they understand the tools that are available to them to protect themselves and they are able to appropriately utilize them. It's something we've tried to do in some of our research. We asked folks about their negative experiences on social media platforms. And then we also ask them about their negative experiences in physical spaces. And then we ask them where they feel safer. And what we have found in our polling year over year is that folks say they face similar rates of harassment in both physical and digital spaces, but that they still feel safer in the digital ones. Which speaks to me to the sort of harassment and negative behavior that members of the LGBTQ plus community face in digital spaces, not happening in a vacuum. That is very real world hatred and bigotry being replicated, and in many ways, in many cases kind of expanded on and horrendously. But I could go on a tangent about the poll forever. But I'll get back to my point about user-centric features. There is an element here of making, of putting the user in that driver's seat. I will give one small, very specific example that we've seen work fantastically, which is actually just giving youth the ability to filter out specific keywords. Because we've seen trans youth be able to filter out their dead name, for example, so nobody can come in and comment that. Because a platform's moderation is not going to know that someone's dead name is an insult if it's being used, but that youth will. So it seems like a very simple change you can make, but it is one that has a lot of impact for a lot of users. And I'll sum it up here by saying I think it's, on one hand, it's the user-centric tools. What are available to users? What are they opting in on versus opting out of? And then the other side of it is, do they have trust in how the platform handles reporting when it is brought to them? Not only, we know we're going to face negative experiences on social media platforms. So people are going to have to report harassment and bullying and whatnot. And what happens when they do? What are the next steps? Who is in charge of that process and what is the outcome?
That polling approach of thinking about online experiences in contrast to real world experiences is a new one for me. That's an intriguing way to really understand how distinctive the experiences online. So thank you.
I think it's interesting. We spend a lot of time talking about how to make youth and everybody, youth and adults alike, kind of good stewards of the physical world. And we have not spent that much time teaching people how to be good stewards in the digital one. And so I think when you're left with the world of social media at your hands, if you don't know how to navigate that, you're just going to face the same things as you do in physical spaces, but maybe without the tools to feel like you can protect yourself.
Thank you. When you use as a transition, maybe you mentioned your mark, the role of parents and caregivers. So in terms of empowering or enabling kids and teens to create better experiences, is there something they can do, or are they struggling and clueless also? Is there anything we can ask for them to do?
Yeah, I like to make sure people are really aware that these products are moving so fast. We can't expect parents to keep up with them just because kids can't, just because they're older and smarter. I also think, really hitting on the surveillance point, we want to make sure that we are implementing parental controls. It's just about screen time limits and not about the content that is seen or the categories that might be in. And another thing I will say is, whenever I talk to parents, I always talk about building a dialogue of trust between you and the young person that you are trying to parent. And I like to say we're not going to play the shame game. We need to educate parents and make sure that they know that the situations their young people are finding themselves in online are manufactured and are created by the tech companies. And they were put in these uncomfortable situations by online design by tech companies. And if you see a child who's in this situation and who's struggling, and you make them feel guilty about it, it is just going to push them further and further and further away and towards behaviors and coping mechanisms that are incredibly unhealthy and deeper into deeper parts of the internet that are easier to hide from parents. So I just like to really emphasize that no shame point of help your kid understand that these platforms were not designed for them at heart.
I think my daughter's applauding you somewhere. So let's talk about kids and teens themselves. I'd like to hear from you, Marissa, here. Is there anything that we can help them to do to develop healthier internet habits? And have you seen any proposals here that maybe could be part of the solution?
Yeah, I mean, building off of Ava's point, something that we talk about at Advocacy is having conversations with your young people early and often. So when you're giving them their first phone, that's a great opportunity to have these conversations around what is safe and appropriate behavior online and being a trusted adult for them to come to, should they experience, something harmful online. So I think some of the more positive legislation that we've seen at the state level have been, around some of these safeguards for, I think some chatbot legislation has been quite good. There are some opportunities to, one, talk about some of the disclosures, so ensuring that platforms are alerting users to the fact that you are not talking with an actual human being, and making it a deceptive practice to intentionally deceive a user into believing that you're speaking with a human being. I think this is particularly poignant when we're talking about kids using ChatGPT and other platforms as therapy, these chatbots as therapy. And we know this is just extended to youth. I mean, we talk about how impressionable young people are, but people in all ages are turning to these platforms for emotional support. And I think that would benefit all of us to be able to have some of these transparency requirements and disclosures, and ensuring that the platforms are not, deceiving users. So I think to the first point of having some parent involvement, and then ensuring that some of the legislation at the state level, I know that it runs the gamut. If you do any of the work at the state level, you know that it is very far-reaching, so not all of it is the best, but I think some of those that are trying to implement some common sense safeguards are important.
Okay, Shae, I understand you've been doing some research recently that's turned to policy now, particularly at the federal level, and I think you mentioned that you've been doing some research here to try to understand the landscape. So can you give us an overview of what's happening at the federal level in this regard, and maybe just give us a little bit of what each of the sort of most dominant pieces of proposal are meant to do?
Yes, I will do my best to speed run kind of the big four proposals that we're seeing in the federal landscape right now. And I will also say that in the interest of just introducing them, I will keep my own and LGBT text perspective on those. I'll hold that for later in the conversation. But we did just release a report this morning on our website, which actually goes over all four of these, sort of generally what they aim to do if enacted, and kind of where we stand as an organization with a lens toward LGBTQ plus users and content. But overall, the sort of predominant piece of legislation that rules the online safety landscape is COPPA, the Children's Online Privacy Protection Act. That was enacted in 2000 and very broadly essentially put responsibility, liability on platforms for the handling and usage of data for users who were under the age of 13. That was 25 years ago. There's growing recognition that that no longer accounts for the variety or the scope or the usage of social media platforms by youth today. So like I said, there are kind of the big four that we're watching right now. The first is actually COPPA 2.0. It's essentially an expansion of that original legislation. It moves the age from 13 to 17. It expands the pieces of technology that it covers, with pieces like biometric technologies, and it adds a level of verifiable consent for teens and parents from 13 to 17. The second we're seeing is the most headline-making of the four. It's KOSA, the Kids Online Safety Act. This has popped up in various iterations since 2022, I believe. It's like I haven't been fighting it that long. It's since 2022. And largely what all of the versions of KOSA aim to do is to put a quote-unquote duty of care onto social media platforms to make them liable for users on those platforms who are under the age of 18 from experiencing or viewing harmful content. Like I said, we can get more to the details of the different iterations, but that's kind of what they all aim to do. The third is called COSMA. We had this argument this morning if it's COSMA or COSMA, we don't know. Go with COSMA. It's the Kids Off Social Media Act. This is the most I think, intrusive of the four because this puts an outright ban on users under the age of 13 on social media, and it actually also would implement a requirement for public schools to ban social media on their public networks. And finally, the fourth is one that has just started kind of making headlines in the past week or two. It's called Sammy's Law. This was named after a youth who tragically died after acquiring drugs via a social media platform. So his parents have created this push to allow for more supervision and parental control over social media access and behaviors. So Sammy's Law would require social media companies and platforms to create and maintain a system, an API, that allows third-party monitoring services to watch and to control and to change the experience and the access of a youth on a platform, as well as notifying the parent if they come across any quote-unquote harmful or risky content. So, like I said, those are the big four. That was as fast as I think I could get through that.
Well done. Well done. I think you just went through like 400 pages of legislation in about 30 seconds. And let me build on that by perhaps offering you an opportunity to share your distinct perspective on these pieces of legislation. Is there anything about them that becomes more or less appealing in the transition from the Biden administration, because some of these have their roots, well before this administration, into the Trump administration?
Yes, I fear the past 6 months have made me a bit of a wet blanket for a lot of this, because I think what I was talking about last year as hypotheticals are now very much the reality of members of the community. We have watched this administration just systematically misuse its authority to attack members of the community, from the White House stripping all resources and defunding, the CDC research, to the FTC hosting a workshop called the quote-unquote Dangers of Gender Affirming Care for Minors. And if you did not have the absolute displeasure of having to watch that workshop, essentially what it came down to is that the FTC has decided that it is a deceptive practice to tell youth that they can be transgender, is what the entirety of the workshop was. So the FTC has now decided that that is within their mandate as a consumer protection agency to now legislate and actively work to prevent. We actually felt strongly enough about this workshop that Public Knowledge and LGBT Tech hosted a counter workshop the following day where we brought experts in to not only counter the points from the previous day, but talk about how it was a complete misuse of FTC authority. Excuse me. But I will wrap that all up by saying if they say it about gender-affirming care, they will say it about gender-affirming content. So something we have become very cautious about when we've looked at this legislation is not the well-meaning intentions of the people writing it. I am looking at the less well-intentions of the people who would be enforcing it and the people who would have the ability to misuse it.
Marissa or Ava, do you have any comments on this particular question, or should I move on?
I just want to, Shae can say it a lot more eloquently than I, but the duty of care, and because it also reflects some of the state level legislation that we're seeing with the age appropriate design codes and some of the other legislation. But we haven't, FOSI has not come out in support of the age appropriate design codes at the state level. But we do have, particular concern. I think we, as we all do, believe in the spirit of the legislation. However, the execution of it and what that has potential to do, I think, gives us a bit of pause. So.
If you're looking for an age appropriate design code to start at, I would go to Nebraska and work from there. There's a lot of great things happening in Nebraska. I would just say that as go look at it. The other thing I'll say is I think this conversation is incredibly important, and I'm really glad that we're having it. We've had a really hard time cutting through the static to young people to see how they actually feel about regulation online, because the conversations that we end up having are incredibly polarized because of the difference in intention of the bill versus intention of a potential enforcer. So I would just say it's kind of outside of the question, but as we move towards the House putting out their kid safety package, I think we as a community should be really, really intentional about not polluting the information ecosystem that we're trying to fix and not using fear-mongering language to manipulate the young people that we're trying to protect, and being really, really clear and nuanced about what these pieces of legislation do, what the mechanisms that could potentially be misused are, and what the intention behind it is. Because young people, when they hear that their government is trying to take away their First Amendment right to speech, it makes them not trust institutions, it makes them not trust the government, and that just perpetuates the anxiety and the nervousness that young people are feeling and the unsafeness that young people are feeling in this weird iteration of democracy that we're in. So I would just urge everyone to try to use objectivity doesn't really exist, but objective and nuanced language when discussing the do's and the don'ts of these pieces of legislation.
So building on that, how have the voices of youth been incorporated into the development of some of these proposals, federal level, state level? Are they being heard from? Stakeholder consultation? Do we feel like there's sufficient insight from kids and teens themselves? I'm obviously going to tackle you here.
Yeah, I would say I think we've made so much progress with the online safety conversation, specifically with getting young people into rooms. I mean, the fact that I'm sitting here right now and have been sitting in these rooms for the past 2 years, I think is a testament to that. And we have Emma Lemke coming in later, and we have so many young people who are just incredible and working in this space. But I don't think that we've done a good enough job speaking to all of the young people and making sure that we're talking to a really representative population. And it goes back to this issue that I was speaking to earlier of when our narratives become so hyper-polarized and black and white and right and wrong, the groups of kids who would be on the front end of legislation feel, in our experience, they feel too burnt out and overexposed to come to the table and have the conversations about what some solutions to that would be. And I don't think that it's young people, specifically marginalized young communities' jobs to fix things that we put out, but I do think, going back to my last point, using really nuanced language and speaking to young people as if they are adults who can understand this, and not using the fact that they're not constitutional lawyers to make really abrupt statements about what laws will or will not do to our advantage in pushing forth our agenda, but rather, again, making sure we're talking to and protecting the young people that we need to understand and whose lives will be changed by this, so they feel more comfortable coming to the table.
A quite specific question about enforcement. Any policy proposal or mechanism that calls for protection of kids' safety and privacy online needs to demand to know one thing. Who's a kid? Like, how do we know? How do these provisions kick in? How do we know that this is relevant? How do we know what to do? And so there's been a wide variety of mechanisms on age assurance created. So I'd like to talk a little bit about what additional risks or benefits does the use of age assurance mechanisms introduce, and kind of what are the trade-offs? When are they warranted? When is that balance of risks and benefits right and when it's not? Do you want to start,
Yeah,
first?
sure, absolutely. So FOSI will have a lot to say on age assurance very, very soon.
Everyone like this.
We have been working on age assurance with our member companies for several years, and we put out a white paper in 2022 sort of talking about the breadth of age assurance mechanisms that exist and the effectiveness or lack thereof of each type. And soon we'll be putting out some more information on where we stand with age assurance. But I think age assurance has, I think, inherently the binary of privacy and safety that we are always coming back to when doing this work. The more information you have to give about yourself in order to identify who is a child, there are privacy concerns there. But balancing that with the desire to keep all of us, and particularly children, safe online. So at FOSI, we do believe that the technology has advanced enough to where there can be a privacy-preserving way to do age assurance. That mechanism, we believe, as far as legislation goes, shouldn't be prescriptive. So no legislation should be able to set out one particular way to do age assurance. And I think this phrase and term that folks in this room have probably heard, the risk-based and proportionality of age assurance. So for the, and I know that there's some contention with, the word risky and what that can mean, but ensuring that children have some level of protection for the platforms where they will receive we're trying to prevent the riskiest of online behaviors. So age assurance, we do think that there's a way to do it, and we think that the technology exists. I think one thing that we're trying to do now is to educate, because I think we're talking about some of that trust that we don't have in platforms or in legislation or in legislators. So being able to build some of that trust, some of that awareness, and I think this all comes back to what we all would, I think, really, really love is a data privacy bill at the federal level, so that we were able to protect, I know, a very, very shocking concept. I think we would love to see some data privacy happen so that there can be a little bit more of that trust built to be able to implement an age assurance mechanism.
How you guys, either of you want to jump in on age assurance?
Yeah, and I'll jump in on that first at the level of the federal data privacy, because it currently is right now, it feels like we're trying to piece together a building, but we've missed the ground floor. So, what we hear right now about age verification and age assurance is it does seem like kind of out of one side of the mouth we're hearing that these social media platforms cannot possibly be trusted with our data, that they are continually misusing and stealing and selling our data, and then out of the other side that we need to provide them with our government identification. So it's I know that is kind of the conversation for people who aren't as ingrained in it as I'm sure some of the folks in this room are. I think it actually speaks to what Ava was saying before about it being confusing and kind of leaving voices out in the process. The other thing I'll say is when it comes to age verification, we are obviously very concerned about that becoming identity verification. It is a very slippery slope in that way, and speaking specifically for the LGBTQ+ community, we know that 40% of trans adults don't have IDs that actually match their identity. So again, that slippery slope of when you're talking about how do you actually determine that someone is who they say they are on social media, we just always urge kind of the utmost caution, because the people who are not going to potentially be able to provide the information required of them, those are the people who actually need that access the most.
Yeah, I think that we have a huge late mover advantage here. We should be looking to Australia. I think it came out of Melbourne, a study. They tested almost 50 different methods of age verification technology, and they have very, very conclusive results of this works, this doesn't work. And I think we can learn a lot from them, but I agree, I do think that it is technologically feasible to age verify without impeding on privacy and requiring people to upload government IDs. That should never be the answer, ever.
And just to wrap on age assurance, and I think we all know, I think it all comes down to age assurance, but it's never going to be a silver bullet. There are always going to be use cases and instances where it is ineffective, it is invasive, but just that the breadth of online safety, especially for young people, does not start and stop with age assurance, but it is 100% a part of the conversation, and we are always going to, go back to literacy and ensuring that all of us are media and digitally literate. So just want to say that.
So while our federal lawmakers try to move 1, 2, 3, or 4 of these proposals forward, the states, the laboratories of democracy, are doing a lot. I think at last count, depending on the topic, there were like 30, 50 state level proposals. So I want to hear from each of you, but I know it's going to be a highlight reel. So for each of you, which of the states are you watching? Are the ideas that you're watching that you feel have promise either at the state level or the federal level? So we'll go this way.
I think it's not, without naming any specific states, I think we are watching for two types of intentions, but I think I hinted at earlier, which is, those states or legislators that are building these pieces out with well intentions, and in many cases actually creating either carve-outs or specific protections for the individuals that they hear on the federal level might be negatively impacted. The other side of that is obviously the exact opposite. And so something we are consistently watching for, though, and encouraging these well-intentioned legislators to keep in mind, is that with all of the noise happening right now around this issue, it is very easy for a less than well-intentioned legislator or legislature to take a bill, strip out just a couple of provisions, and then essentially revisit it and posit it as the same or inspired by. So I won't go into any more detail as far as the states are concerned. That's more Marissa's ballpark, but it is just a note of caution where that is concerned. It's just make sure you're reading the bills.
Understanding your intentions.
Yes.
This is your area.
This is my area, and full disclosure, FOSI is a full-time staff of 6, and I am one of 2 on the policy team. My manager does federal, international, and I do state, which means I cover all 50 of them. So our tracking doc is wild, as you might imagine. But to that point, it would be hard to pinpoint a few states. I think we can all look at the big ones, and they are always doing work on these issues. I think I host a state policy event twice a year. We'll travel to the state capitol and talk about these state-specific issues. There's one next week if you're in the area, in Arlington. I'm happy to send you those details. But I think we're always tracking the age-appropriate design codes and just the differences in the few states that have just passed them. As we've talked about, there are just stark differences in the very first one that came out in California versus Maryland versus Vermont and Nebraska, who have just passed variations of this legislation. We're also looking at some of this died down a bit, but the personalized fees legislation that has come up. It was particularly first passed in New York, and that was quite a huge deal. And I think that they have not come out with the rulemaking yet, but we're still highly anticipating what that's going to look like. And I think where we're also seeing a lot of interest, at least for FOSI, is some of the, I know it's a bit, off topic, but the cell phone bans and cell phone legislation and also media literacy legislation, we're thinking that this is an area where we can see some positive movement. We want to ensure that we're meeting children where they are, while also not overburdening teachers that are already, asking to do the world and then some. But we think that there are opportunities to build out some really good, comprehensive digital and media literacy legislation at the state level. And we're hosting a webinar tomorrow to talk about some states that have done really good work on implementing some AI curriculum into school districts. So the state of Maine, they have a whole, I think it's the Maine Learning Technology Initiative, and they put out an AI guidance toolkit. And we think this is a really great way that states are helping give resources to teachers and students on how to safely integrate technology into the classroom. And one, it's not a ban, it's not saying AI is just bad, so never use it, but being able to educate on that sometimes AI is going to be wrong, and sometimes ChatGPT is going to be wrong, and if you use it for this assignment, that is considered cheating, but you can use it in this way to summarize an article. So I am hesitant to say that there are I think some legislation is better than others, but I think we would really, really love to see some of this movement are, as I mentioned before, with some of the AI disclosures and transparency, as well as some of this media literacy education. And, at FOSI, we're watching all of the major players in the major states that are coming out with legislation. So, again, not the greatest answer, but happy to go into more detail.
Eva, how about you? And particularly, you had such positive energy about it. I'd love to know more about Nebraska, in addition to any other intentions or bills or ideas that you're watching.
Yeah, we're just watching how the age-appropriate design codes are changing as some of them are being ruled on, particularly in California. And that's why I'm so interested in Nebraska and in Maryland, because you can compare the California text next to the Nebraska text, and you can see what they had to take out and what they were able to keep in and what they were able to tweak. And I think that the changes made between then and now can really guide us at the federal level, and we can look at what has worked. For me, what's most interesting about the states is looking about how the courts in those states are ruling and how we can use that as lampposts, lighthouses for what we're going to do. Next, I think something that we also need to be paying very, very close attention to at the states is what's going to pop up on these chatbot pieces of legislation. I think the chatbots are without a doubt the next wave of online harms that our young people are facing, and we want to make sure that these legislatures don't leave design-based legislation in the rearview mirror when they start moving towards this AI-based regulation. So we're being very careful about that. We're also keeping a really keen eye on Utah because they're approaching things very differently than some of these other states and really looking at data ownership and kind of moving towards that like Web3, the crypto bro regulation, which I think is really interesting. But if they're able to make some of their data ownership models work, I think that is definitely something we should look at incorporating into the federal level. Now, do I think that's a couple years out? Without a doubt, but that's something that protects both young people and adults. And what I like to say is focusing only on young people is down the road fruitless because young people are not safe if they grow up into a democracy where adults are continuing to use social media in polarizing ways that they are using it. So we need to look at both of those things as a lever to protect kids. And I think Utah is doing some really cool stuff there.
I'm going to move from the local to the global, literally. But before I do, let me give you guys a heads up. It looks like we may have time to just hear from you in an open-ended way about what you would like this audience of passionate advocates for kids and teens to know. So if you think about, absent any of my questions, what would you have them take away? Just at the end, I think we'll have a little bit of time to do that, just so we can get some. So let's move from the state level to the world. We're not the only country that has taken this on and is trying to create better experiences. Similarly, what other countries are you following? Are you watching? Do you think he's doing it right or doing it horribly wrong? Marissa, do you want to start us off here as well?
Sure. Well, I think it might be challenging to do a one-to-one comparison between the U.S. and any other country. I think we can talk about some things that we're seeing that aren't so great and some that we're seeing that are. Generally, FOSI, and I will leave the country's name out, but generally FOSI is 100% against blanket bans on any technology. It is just ineffective.
All right, there goes Australia.
I was going to say, it's not effective. It doesn't teach children how to safely navigate the internet. That said, I think, again, not a one-to-one, but we have, what I do appreciate about some of the work that they're doing in the UK is that they are not letting perfection be the enemy of the good, and they are, at least are trying to do some really intentional work on keeping kids safe online. A million and one issues and problems with some of the regulations and whether or not it's feasible, whether or not it's going to be, be able to be implemented, and the compliance is also something to take into consideration. However, I think one baseline is that I think everyone has heard this talking point, but one, in the U.S., we're still trying to decide whether or not children have rights and whether or not we want to extend these rights to children. And I think with the issue that we were discussing about the duty of care, that comes into consideration, and other countries have ratified the UN Convention on the Rights of the Child. Therefore, there is a baseline that establishes that children have a right to access information and to be kept safe. So I think that is one difference, that I think in the UK they at least have a baseline understanding that children deserve access, and then building on top of that. And I'm the state lead, not the federal, which is my manager, but I know there's a million and one reasons that people say no, don't do anything that the UK would be doing at all. But I would say that those are states that we're tracking, countries that we said those that we're tracking.
How about you, as well?
Yeah, we don't do anything about the best. We watch it very closely, and we incorporate what other countries have learned into our work, as we should, being, again, the late movers here in the United States. Which is interesting because the technology is coming from us, right? I mean, you think we would figure it out first. Anyway, we've been paying, so the first question you asked me, what is it that young people want from the internet? I think when we look at the UK Online Safety Act and what's happening in the UK right now, you set me up for a really unique way of answering this question, which is not what do young people want, but what have young people been conditioned to expect, and that is frictionless experiences. And I think we can pay very close attention to what's happening in the UK, which is these companies are doing some form of malicious overcompliance and taking away the frictionless experiences that they have given to young people, and then that is leading young people to feel incredibly uncomfortable, to feeling like they've been backed into a corner, to feeling like this internet that they've had forever has been taken away from them. And I'm not going to say that the UK Kids Online Safety Act is perfect, or that it was, enforced perfectly, not at all. But I think when we're learning from other countries, not only do we need to be looking at the legislation, but we need to be looking at how the companies reacted to that legislation. And we need to be very, very ready in our push for regulation to hear these companies say like, well, everyone in the UK hates that they're safe on the internet now. And it's like, well, that's because you conditioned them into a certain level of comfort and not having to put in any effort to use your online experience, and now you're adding a lot of friction. So I think that's what I would say is really, really pay close attention to how we're going to enforce and how we're going to encourage compliance, and see where we can make tweaks in legislation that won't have us ending up in a place where companies can over-comply and then point and blame it on the government and be like, they told me to do this.
So that introduces a whole different level of kind of examination for policy. It's about intention. and it's about design, and it's about enforcement, and it's about compliance, and each of those things. It's really interesting. Shae, do you want to add anything?
Yeah, I think while we're talking about the United Kingdom, I think we pretty firmly believe that that's as good of a case study as we're going to get in great intention for execution. I think the chilling effect was immediate, and we saw that with innocuous and affirming communities just immediately being age-gated and limited. Some the choice of the platform, others just being hit by overcautious moderation, I'll call it. And we've seen those headlines, and they haven't been great. And I think that is the balance that the government and these tech platforms are going to have to continue to try to figure out is where that balance is between that safety and that autonomy. What I will say that I thought was very interesting about the UK is actually looking at petitions that are submitted to the UK Parliament. Because when you go on their list, you can see, historically what the most popular petitions have been. Bless you. And up until the passage of this legislation, one of the most popular petitions for the Parliament was actually to get the passage of legislation like this, if not this exact legislation. Then this passed, and almost immediately that petition was surpassed by hundreds of thousands of people asking for this to be repealed. So I think it is a situation where you had a lot of people who thought it was going to be very easy to flip a switch and make it safer, and that their experiences, their innocuous or healthy experiences, would not be impacted, and that just was not the reality of the experience. So we know we are not a one-to-one comparable environment with the United Kingdom, but I think there are a lot of lessons we can take away from this, and I am very interested that the US does get to watch in real time someone try to navigate it.
One of the reasons I was so excited to be able to moderate this panel is that each of you have such a distinctive lens, great expertise in a very specific perspective. So I'm interested in what would each of you like to know more about in terms of developing policy in this space? If you had an unlimited research budget, sort of what do you wish you could find out more about in order to inform how policy develops in this space? And I'll start on this side.
Yeah, I love this question. Money and seeing where it goes and where it comes from. I would also want to do a lot of research into technical feasibility. For example, with the UK Online Safety Act, the companies are acting like they're pressed up against the wall right now. Like, this is the only way I could comply, this was the only option. When in reality, they could have used like any ounce of creativity to think of new ways to deliver content, new ways to give users choice over their algorithmic recommendation systems that don't rely on data, all different types of things. Now, the age group variation is different, but I think I would really like to do a lot of research into how much, right? Because I think when you said easy, right? It's not going to be easy. No, it's not going to be easy. I want to do research into how much effort these companies are actually putting in to coming up with technical solutions to the problems that they have been, or that they have pushed onto us. Because I don't think that the necessary amount of effort or research and development is being put into being creative about solving these problems at all.
So if their technologies are going to cure cancer, mitigate climate change, and do all kinds of other wonderful things, why can't they figure some of this out?
Yeah, I think, and my colleague, Alana, who manages our research, would kill me if I didn't mention that we would love just to be able to talk to more youth. I think that just because of the scope and the size of OC, our sample size is always limited, but I think that is some of the richest data that we will ever get on how children are using, how are they using data, and then being able, or how are they using platforms rather, and then being able to say, okay, now what do you want? What would you in a perfect world like to see? I think this would be, super just useful. I think youth voice gets lost in the conversation so often, and it is oftentimes a lot of policy wonks, debating the intricacies of a piece of legislation when it is going to be all of us that are impacted by it, but particularly children. So I would love to be able to do more research has a youth focus, and Lucy is coming out with some of our research that will be launched in November at our annual conference.
I would love, so research is my bread and butter, and I would love to be able to explore intersectionality of the LGBTQ plus community, because it is a somewhat unique community in that we intersect with every other marginalized community, and at those intersections we see oftentimes the greatest need. And those are both the people I think policymakers and policy wonks need to hear from the most, and they are often the hardest and the most expensive to actually hear from. So, we do an annual national poll with LGBTQ plus adults across the United States, and one place where we spend a lot of time and attention and frankly extra money is making sure we've oversampled for transgender adults, because we understand that those are unique experiences, and at every single metric, those numbers, both the positive that comes from having digital access and the negative that comes from, experiencing bigotry and hatred online, it just rises exponentially across the board for trans folks. And so you give me an unlimited budget, I'm gonna explore every single intersectionality between income and race and gender identity and sexual orientation, and really figure out what it means to be an LGBTQ plus person who has the world of information at your fingertips, and all the good and bad that comes along with it.
We've, as expected, focused a lot of our conversation on kids and teens and the unique needs, dynamics, considerations there. But we also promise that we talk about making the internet a healthier and safer space for everybody. So are there other alternatives that you'd like to see focused on all citizens? Like, this is something that should be for everyone, or policy solutions that would best be not done just for kids, but that should be elevated to be reflective of the rights and concerns of all of us? Who wants to start here?
Federal privacy framework, please.
And not instead of, but like a yes and. I don't think that these priorities are competing, but definitely comprehensive data privacy framework is so important. Also, I think what we did on COSO was attach the filter bubble to it, which would extend the rights towards algorithmic transparency to adults as well. And I think that is one really, really simple thing we could do. I don't want to say like so quick, but I think that's one simple thing we could do, is give adults the right to choose between an input transparent and an opaque algorithm. So an input transparent, you can see what's going into it, you control what's going into it, and the opaque algorithm is what currently exists on social media platforms. So if we can pull adults out of like the polarized content consumption that they're in right now, and the extreme content consumption, because these issues that we see young people facing, they're not unique to young people. It's happening to everyone. The engagement-based algorithms are coming for everyone. So I think that's one. Thing we can do, and it's already in COSA. It exists in there. Filter bubble transparency title 2.
I mean, a plus one to data privacy, that shouldn't just exist for children. I think we would all love more and increased protections for our data. I think all of us could be more digitally literate, and I would love for that to, expand beyond kids in schools, because we know that a lot of us need that education. And I think we would love to see, what just escaped me, but I think media literacy and data privacy for absolute certain.
Yeah, it aligns with that, I think, a lot, but digital equity funding, like, it breaks my heart every time I see another headline about this administration stripping that funding that was just allocated, stripping it back, because so much of that was going to digital literacy that ensured that, people going onto these platforms and going into technological spaces didn't just have to try to navigate them themselves and get it wrong before getting it right. That would have done so much good.
And sorry, it just came back to me, but just user tools in general, I think we all have been talked about parental tools and parental controls, but being able to, all of us being empowered to create the digital lives and digital spaces and ecosystem that we would like to. So, in not user tools, not just for parents, but being able to have them for all of us.
Yeah, or like reporting mechanisms that actually work, I think would be huge for adults. Like if an adult reports something and says, I don't want this on my feed, that should stay off of their feed. That's not a problem that only happens to young people. I think user controls is so important there.
Gonna move this way, open mic question. We have an audience of people who've taken the time to spend a day with us learning about kids' privacy and safety, so we are very motivated to see positive progress here. What would you like them to know? Something I didn't ask, something you wish I had, just an open message for people who want to make a positive difference in this space. You want to start?
Do you have one right off the top of your head? I have so many I have to choose.
I think I'll reiterate what you've heard me say before is that to not allow youth voices to get lost in the conversation, and particularly marginalized youth. I think in a lot of this well-intentioned legislation, we are not always thinking about the disproportionate impacts that could happen on, especially kids that come from unsupported households and the loss of access that they'll have to content that they need. So I would love for whatever you take away from this does not get lost in, I think we all are so passionate about this work, and we have been doing, and some of us have been doing privacy for a really long time, or have been doing just policy for a really long time, and we get caught in some of that policy wonkiness, but bringing it back to what those real impacts are going to be for kids, but for all of us, I would love to leave you all in.
I think I would beg everyone here not to divorce the legislation we're talking about from the broader political environment. And it is because I think the youth that are being affected by that broader political environment certainly aren't. This is not currently a supportive environment to be young and to be queer or be trans, and that is something that has been made abundantly clear to these youth. They know that. And I think you see that when you look at them being surveyed by places like the Trevor Project. Like, they report that, they are well aware. And so I don't think we can afford to pretend that legislation is happening in sort of this technological bubble. Anything that is happening in the real world is being replicated for better or worse in digital spaces. And that includes really, keep trying to think of another word for ill-intentioned, but it really is the best, I think. That includes really ill-intentioned legislative efforts to attack members of this community. So, like I said, please don't divorce this legislation and this issue from the broader political landscape. It is all tied together very, very deeply, very intrinsically, and I think that goes for many marginalized communities outside my own. That's just the one I'm up here to speak about today.
Yeah, I think I would say the legislation that we're going to pass, which is going to solve this issue, is a piece of legislation that puts the onus on the tech companies to solve these problems at the design level. Everything else will be additive, everything else will solve small micro problems, but nothing is going to comprehensively at least begin to solve the entire problem unless it is on the design level, and unless the duty to implement those design level changes fall on the company. And we have a strong enforcement mechanism with teeth that allows these people to go after these companies, whether that be through somebody else, and receive relief for the harms that they face online. I think that's what I would say. We've had a lot of debate about different pieces of legislation, but we're not going to solve this problem if we do not intervene at the design level. It's never going to happen. We can go in circles about what that'll look like all day, but it's gotta happen, and we can do it. Yeah.
We're gonna go to Anton. I want to thank the panel, Ava, Marissa, Shae. I so appreciate again your distinct perspectives. I learned a lot. I'm sure you're taking more notes. I'm super glad we started the digital literacy project working. Sounds like something we should lean into. So let's have a round of applause for